evening, everyone, and welcome to the 411th reading of the It's About Time Writers Reading Series. It was actually started in January 1990, so this seems very appropriate to have Esther with us tonight. Indeed, the whole series was founded by Esther at Helfgott in 1990 and dedicated to the memory of Anna Helfgott, 1899 to 1996, who began writing at age 70, and to the memory of Nelson Bentley, 1918 to 1990, the quintessential teacher who gave Anna and scores of others help and hope. It's About Time is dedicated to an end of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, homelessness, and war. Since its inception, It's About Time has always welcomed new and experienced writers, various genres, and participants through 3-minute open mic readings. Very excited tonight to be able to have sort of a special host. Shin Pai is this year's Seattle Civic poet through the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture in partnership with the Seattle City of Literature. She is the 4th Civic poet since they brought the poet program back. And so tonight's evening is a partnership program with the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Shani is a Seattle-based poet and the author of 11 books, including most recently Virga by Empty Bowl. She's been the recipient of awards from Arts and Culture, For Culture, and the Awesome Foundation. She is a 2022 Artist Trust Fellow and was shortlisted in 2014 for a Stranger Genius Award in Literature. From 2015 to 2017, Shin Yi served as Poet Laureate for the city of Redmond, and her nonfiction has appeared widely throughout the United States. Her work has also appeared in publications through Japan, China, Taiwan, the UK, and Canada. She is the writer, host, and producer of The Blue Suit, a podcast on Asian American stories for KUOW Public Radio, Seattle's NPR affiliate station. She has new poetry books forthcoming in 2023 from Empty Bowl Press and Blue Cactus Press, and has put some of the information in the chat. I am now delighted to welcome both Esther, our founder, here this evening, and Shin Yi, who will be hosting.
Thank you so much. Just want to express my gratitude to Esther for establishing this fine series, and for Peggy for inviting me to be a part of the series this season and to host these wonderful poets tonight. So our first reader tonight is Ricardo Ruiz. Ricardo is a multi-dimensional writer of poetry and prose. The son of potato factory workers, Ricardo hails from Othello, Washington. His work draws from his experience as a first-generation Mexican-American and from his military service. Ricardo holds an associate degree in business and accounting from Big Bend Community College, where he was recognized as Student of the Year in both business and economics and English composition. He also holds a Bachelor of Art in Creative Writing from the University of Washington. While in the military, Ricardo earned the rank of Staff Sergeant while serving on 4 deployments, 2 to Afghanistan. His debut collection of poetry reached #1 on Amazon's Hispanic American Poetry Chart. Ricardo is passionate about elevating marginalized voices from rural communities and takes pride in being a conduit for cultural connection. And his anthology, We Had Our Reasons, won a 2023 Washington Book Award. Please welcome Ricardo, who joins us today from the East Coast.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Thank you for having me, Esther. Thank you for starting this wonderful space, allowing writers and poets to come and share. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. I know I have a bias. The best art form there is. I will be reading tonight exclusively from We Had Our Reasons. I don't know. There it is. Yeah. So, thank you, Shin Yu, for inviting me to be here. And yeah, we're just gonna get started. This first poem is entitled Silent Crossing, Sleeping to the Other Side. You slept for 2 days, overdrugged by the coyote. I gathered all the sounds you should have made, placing them inside the leather bag upon my shoulder. When my steps strained, I opened the satchel and listened. Each night, I held your sounds and know your future's here. This collection started as a desire to record my family's history, migrating from Mexico to Eastern Washington, specifically Othello, to work in the orchards and fields that surround the area and that fill the Columbia Basin. I spent a year and a half conducting interviews with friends and family, the women who raised me, my mother, the ladies from the church and the community, and also friends of mine who both, like myself, are first gen and who are dreamers, who were brought to this country as children. I took all of these interviews and distilled them down into poetic verse and lyric, working with the original storyteller to tell the story of migration through verse and lyric. This first poem was by the mother, the story was passed to me to share by the mother of a friend of mine who gave her son to coyotes, to human traffickers, when he was 3 years old, to bring him across the border, strangers, while she walked herself across the desert. This next poem is entitled Mi Carcachita Azul y el Perro Negro, which quickly translates to My POS Car and the Black Dog. I slept in the back seat until the sun shone high, or I'd sit in the driver's seat and take the wheel. Sometimes I'd wiggle out and lie on the hood of the dusty 1982 blue Topaz. Our sitter, that black dog who'd play for hours, he just kept bringing us back the ball, and we just laughed and ran through the rows. I always waited for the time my parents would break, my mom's face shining under the bandana and sun hat, fresh cherries in her hand, foil burritos still warm in the dented green thermos, our lunch. The trunk of the car became our table on our own. Bring your kids to work day. My parents migrated from Mexico in 1972. I showed up in 1985. I was born here. My brothers, they were born in Texas before my parents came north. With the gap between my brothers and I, they are 10 and 8 years older than me. And my parents having been established in the country, by the time that I came around, they were no longer undocumented, but had first received their resident alien status, and then later in 1983 received full citizenship. My youth was different than that of my brothers. They worked at a potato factory for 30 plus years, but I remember as a child on the weekends going to the fields with my parents. They would work during the week and then go and pick cherries or apples or cut asparagus. This next poem I'm going to share is by my friend Jose, the daughter of Lorena, who was trafficked into this country at 3 years old. The general on the battlefield leading the troops. Where did these red and black warriors come from? How do they know to search out the aphids that feed off the succulent tissue of the gala? I stood charged to lead my spotted counterparts, sending them out to battle. Hold the line, Ladybug. Protect the fruit. The organic label needs us. The orange bucket hummed as my mother handed it to me. Pon atención, estás trabajando. Translating to pay attention, you're working. At 12 years old, my friend was taken to a building in Ephrata. He was given a fake social security card, a fake identification, a fake work permit. And at 12 years old, his first day on the job, he was planting a new orchard with his father. His second day on the job, his responsibility was working with the women, placing ladybugs on apple trees. When he told me this story, I was gripped by the imagery of a child putting ladybugs on apples. And that is where this poem came from. I worked with him and I told him when I first told him the idea that I had of my image of what it'd be like for a 12-year-old, a child, to be working a grown man's job to help try to provide for the family. It was that of play, seeing an insect and not viewing them as a resource, but as something to enjoy, knowing that they're there to eat a bug, but being in charge of it and taking that command and what it'd be like for a mother to go and hold her child in that state of responsibility. This next poem's entitled 8-Year-Old Does a Beer Run. It's different in a brown town. A handful of crumpled dollars sent across the alley for the coldest beer around. He's never had me go alone on my own. I'd usually just follow him there. 2 tall boys. Technically, it's illegal, but technically, you can say, so am I. My parents bought a house in Othello in the early 80s. I took my first steps there and I lived there in my youth. My parents still own the home. My mom still lives there. And as I was working on this collection, I went home to visit her. And across the main street, about 2 blocks away, there's a grocery store. My mom sent me there still to go and pick up some limes or lemons. And as I was standing in line, I saw this young child with a handful of crumpled dollars sent to that same store to buy something for his mother. And I saw him, and right across the street, there's a gas station that my dad would always get alcohol after work. Well, one day he had sent me, I was probably 8 years old. And that image of seeing this young man really brought that back to me. This next poem is entitled Ain't Shit to Do When Your Parents Are Always Working. The question sat suspended in the air, so with 2 fingers I plucked it from the sky, examining its details in the lights of the street lamp. I wore its colors, blood red, asking to be spilled. I took that question and pinned it on my chest, feeling its weight and power. They were my friends, my people. We would walk the half-mile to school together. I was part of the group, but to be a member, they were asking me. I wanted to feel the fists on my face, to know the boot upon my ribs, and to have them as brothers. But I took the question off. It didn't fit, and lost some friends that day. Still, other gangs were waiting. my parents worked and they worked hard. I can say that I rarely ever went without my needs being met, but they weren't always the most present. I was left alone as a youth to find my way, to go be with the kids on my block. And I remember when one of my friends' house was raided by the police, when they cordoned the area, pulled out his mom and dad, pulled out weapons. I remember a couple days earlier was the first time I had held a gun. Um, Going and being there and seeing a shotgun. I remember running around the streets and wanting that acceptance, wanting the community, but I had a lot of fear. I was, I knew the expectations that my parents had for me, but I knew that the community that I had and what we were doing was what was calling me. Um, I later joined the military, I joined the army, and I feel that in many ways that was an extension to that same desire I had as a child to go and to be a member of something bigger than myself, to find a community that did work for me and understand me. Because in many ways, though I grew up in a migrant farm working town, I never felt fully whole. I didn't feel Mexican enough to be with my friends who might have only spoke Spanish. Um, we are the only family that came north. The rest of my family still lives either in Mexico or near the border in South Texas. If I go back to Mexico, even still today, Spanish is my first language. English is not my first language, though I am quite proficient in it, and it's kind of began to dominate my thinking. I now think in English, though I count in Spanish and dream in Spanish. I'll go to Mexico and my cousins will make fun of me straight up. They're just like, wow, this is not the way. But yet, when I speak Spanish at home within my community, and especially with the friends I have in Seattle, the common response is like, wow, you speak such good Spanish. And now, as an adult, I can really find my way through that. As a child, I couldn't. There was always this feeling of othering that I could never quite get past. Um, and always looking for a place where I could feel whole, where I could find community. In 2010, I deployed the first time to Afghanistan, returning in 2011. I have an older brother who at the time was working as a Border Patrol agent in Arizona. I was going to visit him, and at the time, the state of Arizona passed law SB 1070. This poem is in response to that law. Arizona SB 1070. Cherries and berries light up behind me. The busted hoopty I was riding drew his eye. The worn spots of the steering wheel comfort my hands, perspiring from their locked grip. Your immigration papers. I need to verify your status. I asked to go into my glove box. Does the stippling of his Glock massage his hand? I reach, he reaches. Here's my military ID. Just coming back from deployment, having spent a year of my life serving this country, having lost friends in battle, having sustained injuries in combat. I was traveling. Yes, my car was old. It was a 1990 Acura Integra, four-door, busted. The tires were probably worn. The rims were missing hubcaps. I did have to start that car with a screwdriver because the ignition had been ripped out when somebody tried to steal it. And it was an experience that I still today don't know how to truly um, wrap my head around. Though I have been born here, I've lived in this country my entire life. My parents are citizens. Though I had just came back from Afghanistan, I was able to just be walked up to and said, "Where are your immigration papers?" And I remember as I was reaching towards a glove box, I suffer from PTSD from my time in the military, and hypervigilance is something that triggers often in these heightened states. And I remember having this feeling of hypervigilance in checking my mirror right here as I'm going to reach through my glove box, and I'm reaching and I just see his hand creep. Having spent the last year in a combat zone as an infantryman, I was very aware of what was happening and yet had no power in that I could do. And instead of just offering my regular driver's license, in that moment, the only thing that I felt I could do was to give my military ID. I felt like for me, that was the safest answer in the world. Um, this poem is so crucial to me today because the state of Texas has passed similar laws. This was 2011, and yet 11 years later, we're still working within these same thought processes. I'm gonna read one last poem, and yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. To the girl who lost her left eye in J-Town, I'm sorry. I flattened against the cement last night when a truck backfired next to me. Just like when my body collided with your dirt, levitating it, leaving it suspended before the three 500-pound explosives detonated. You were what, 10 then? My kids are your age. I hit them with three water balloons bursting joy over their heads. It's hard to entertain them. It's hard to entertain them. I'm bored. Xbox Live is down. Hulu sucks. Yet you could hit a bicycle tire with a tree branch for hours. My daughter is crying. She's being bullied on TikTok while my son has a play wedding. Do you remember the tall Cherokee man, your favorite among us whose leg you'd run to hug, the one you wanted to marry? He never really left there. Finally, last year, liberating himself. Liberty, that's what we did there. Destroying your home while mangling your body. I'm sorry. You are not my enemy, though I should be yours. Maybe one day I'll too be free. Until then, I still think of you, whose name I no longer remember. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time and attention.
Ricardo, thank you so much for those powerful poems and stories, for helping us to have some insight into your experiences, and just such complexity of identity in your work. Really are grateful for your sharing your work tonight. Thank you again. Peggy, I think there may be a couple of people that you want to put into the open mic loop right now, or where are we at? You're on mute.
Just looking for Priscilla. Priscilla, would you like to do open mic? I don't think anyone else right now has stepped up in the chat. If you do want to do open mic, please let me know. But Priscilla, are you ready to go?
You're muted, Priscilla.
Thank you, Ricardo. That was great. I'm almost ready. Yes, almost ready. What was given, what was found? I was given garter snakes and molasses milk. I found myself walking down a dirt road. I was never given a map. I was given to gossip and late night dancing. I found a closet full of old shoes and red shadows. The dolls sat in their dirty dresses, trying to think what to say. I found a drawer full of clean underpants and old letters. I was given a story about America, amber fields of grain. I was never told about the lynching. I was given to books and dust, to century-old sentences. I found myself shoveling manure in the cow barn. I blessed the bluebells, cursed the good china. I was given good teeth, a good Merlot, a notebook with pallid green pages. I found myself lost in the stacks of an old library. Thanks.
Thank you, Priscilla. The next open mic will be after Ebo. So back to you, Shin.
Great, thank you. Ebo Barton is our second reader tonight. Ebo comes from Salt, from the moment before worlds converged. You may have seen Ebo's work in a Seattle bookstore, your local library, or at the Seattle Sounders FC's Lumen Field, or online on Right About Now, Button Poetry, or the All Deaf Poetry channels. A leader in arts and activism, transgender and non-binary, Black and Filipino poet, artist and educator, Ebo Barton's written, performative, and community work demands societal reckoning. I want to just mention also that Ebo was my guest on my podcast, 10,000 Things for KUOW, and kicked off the second season. And if you want to know more about their work and their identity, it's a wonderful opportunity to get to know their work. Ebo's first book, Insubordinate, can be purchased from his website, ebobarton.com, or listened to on Spotify. Welcome, Ebo. Ebo, I think you're on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me now? Cool. Hi, hello. Okay, cool. Hi, hello. Thank you. So I'm just gonna say really quick, I had this whole like meaningful thing, but now just thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm gonna be reading this poem because I'm so excited to be here. That's inspired by Beyonce, because who's not inspired by Beyonce? And this poem is called Freedom Cut Me Loose. When I came out to my mother, her first reaction was to comment on the volume of my voice when I said transgender, as if being myself in public wasn't already loud. I lowered my voice. Do you reach adulthood when your parents' reactions to your unblossoming start to sound hollow like an empty cage? When you look into a mirror and discover you are the only and ugliest salvation your family ever inherited? Do you reach full-grown adulthood when your reflection rejects you in your second language? The language you kept safe in your back pocket is an exhausted compass that only points towards the ocean. What about respect for my elders means mute myself? Are you still an adult if you just want to go home? I learned that being free isn't what everyone wants, especially if you find custody convenient. And I know that you think my gender makes you angry, that your Jesus did not die for this, but the truth is, my gender binds you to fear. uncovers your discomfort from seeing the rapture of my reach, these bare wrists. What about my freedom scares you? I named myself Ebo to worship a slave rebellion that drowned their captors, rose into the sky, turned into birds, and flew back home. Why would you deny me this worship? Why would you keep this story trapped in a book? And don't mistake me for fearless. It's taken me a whole lifetime to get back home, but I'm still willing to come back for you if you want to come. Jaden Smith's skirt, Billy Porter's entire wardrobe, Lizzo's exposed thong, Monroe Bergdorf's middle finger, Zaya Wade, Harriet Tubman, my beard, my pronouns, my lips blossoming on a shoulder blade. We are the efflorescence of eternal emancipation. Come with us. Before I leave, tell my mother I've uninstalled the whisper in my authentic. And if you don't want to untie the knots of shame, trying to convince you compromises the wind cradling my wings, so stay in bliss. But ask yourself, are you free? Or are you conditioned to this captivity? Whatever the answer is, please let me live. I just want to go home. Thank you so much. I am going to read about my my father, who probably wasn't a great guy, but he gets a poem because he taught me a lesson, which most humans we are connected to often do. It has been 14 years since I've seen you. Could not point you out in a crowd of 3. You left me twice. The first when I was 2, and the second when I was 14. It was as though you could not leave me enough, as though my infant brain could not remember the sudden absence of your screaming voice climbing the walls of all my future relationships, as though it was my fault. I've heard that you and I share features like a dinner I've been force-fed for as long as I can remember, but you won't even sit at the table with me. My memories of you include when I cut my foot at 3 years old and got 12 stitches. You said, I wrote my first poem at 6, a personification of a street sign I remembered how to spell. You reacted to it like, I got my heart broken for the first time when I was 14. A girl who could not understand my obsession with wanting to spend every lunch period together for a week. When she said we couldn't hang out anymore because I was weird, I went home to cry to the day you left. The last words you said to me were, give these keys to your mother. So I said, and I've responded to you like this ever since. Are you proud? I've learned something from you. Will you tell my ex-wife that I stayed 5 years too long? I was learning how to stay and not be my father's. Will you tell my friends that I don't know how to tell them how I'm feeling? Because, dear absent father, missing dad, the silent screaming in the gaping holes of my emotional inabilities, this is an obligatory letter to my biology that I will leave at the roots of a tree I can't even identify. What is the purpose of explaining who I am to you if you don't even recognize the miracle I've always been? I am, it feels like, you should know this about me. I'm, dear dad, is it because I'm too, or too, that you did not want me? But I still exist, and I am so painfully permanent. I am such a miracle. Thank you very much. Introducing folks to your family is like super weird, right? Like this audience of people that you've never met before, and you're like, here's this story about my dad. So like that was always a interesting feeling. I'm gonna just keep going if that's okay. I'm gonna read from my book. And this one is called Prayer Response. My religious aunt recalls a family tragedy in a car ride. The story spills out of her mouth like a communion wine. So we have just come from dinner, so it felt appropriate to drink her every word. Her expensive name brand purse, her pulpit. She ends her sermon by saying, it shows you the power of the hand of God. And my family members are humbly moved out of their minivan bench. My uncle nods from the front seat, and even Santo Niño bobbles on the dashboard with approval. The rear view rosary swaying like a desperation prayer. And my stone and sage burning queer moody self wants to sigh holy breath, but I realized that you can't tell anyone how to worship. My aunt, an unrecognized God herself, speaks as if Jesus is her own son, perpetually surviving and mourning the death of actual Jesus and her actual son and this fiery hell of a family of ours. How can she not see the God in herself? Why do our knees not buckle in prayer as she enters the room, as if we don't call her first before praying to whatever is up there? And maybe it's because we don't want to give the ending away. And maybe this is what the answer has been all along, but maybe it's why I've also never seen myself as holy, why I've ripped my body into pieces and offered it up as a sacrifice to my relationships, while I've told lovers that I'm not even worth praying for, let alone pray to. And I may have never flooded the earth or banished curious fruit pickers from my garden, but I have made an overdrawn bank account pay for wine to heal myself. I've swam in the deepest end, drowned, died, resurrected, and no one even noticed at work on Monday. And isn't that godlike? I've untangled myself from my stepbrother's grip, ran 1,500 miles north and nearly lost myself in the Pacific Ocean, and I still came out with some pretty fly shoes, my God. And there is no book about me, no commandments I list to get into my arms, no cross to carry, no stained glass summaries of the tragedies of my life. And dear God, and by God, I mean you. I mean my Tita Tessie, I mean the Safeway cashier, I mean the nightlife dancer, I mean the person at the bus stop, I mean underpaid, underappreciated, exploited, aggressive youth, you in any sense. I actually mean me, dear me. Look how far you've come in creation. The power of your hand and your breath is the prayer and the response. Thank you so much. I have 2 more for you, if that works. That works? Okay, cool. The next one is a half dialogue. At a writing workshop, I was just like super into the writing prompt. If you want to join in with me, is write a dialogue and then remove the other person and see what happens. And this is sort of the edited version of that. You know, they say to write drunk and edit sober. So this is what the sober did. I listened quietly, noticed every word perfectly pronounced pushed out of her lips. Hold my tongue down as she explains her encounter. She was pulled over. A smile escapes from her lips as she explains that she was high. A chuckle climbs out of her mouth as she explains she had more weed in the car, that she refused the search, that they didn't handcuff her. My pupils grow like a mouth opening, still unable to swallow this truth. This is not a language I know. I bite down on a moon swell and my tongue bleeds. The blood drips down my throat. My chest is a chalice of silence. I've practiced for people like this my whole life. She says, "Oh my God," like she knows him personally, as if her prayers are neatly folded into his robe pocket. She says, "But I hate cops." As she levitates off her chair, it blue lightning in her eyes. Isn't it funny how perpetual pats on the back sound like applause? I nod, begin confessing that I have this condition in which I get pulled over for a taillight that's not out, for a stop sign that didn't exist, for a stop sign that did exist, but my 30-second count was 29 seconds. And this one time, it was for a smell, for a feeling, for a description, for a color. She grabs my words before they left my mouth. She fills each letter with policy and law. You know, you can refuse that, because I did. You should have. They wouldn't have. They can't. I listen quietly, hold my tongue out to her while she explains how my encounter should have went, what I could have done my whole life. She leaves no room for my reality, spills the blood of my people all over her shirt, does not try to wipe it clean. I hold my hands out to her to offer her my whole life. Laws apply differently to you and me. She swallows hard, cooks my truth with America's boiling pot and an eye roll. I am never able to finish my story, and she doesn't even notice. Thank you so much. And I have one last one for y'all. It is my favorite one because I say the F word, if that's okay. It's one of my favorite words. Okay, great. It's called mistakes, and it's something that I'm trying to bring into my activism lately, in that we're all human beings and our point to be here is just to mess up. So how do we do that? Like, how do we hold those two things of wanting to move forward and wanting to be better, but also knowing that we're humans and we're gonna F this up no matter what we do. So let's work on it, shall we? Yeah. I have traveled in and out of the Pacific Ocean, across this wretchedly beautiful fuckery of borders we call a country. I've been to love, but never through it. I've been through 2 puberties, y'all. A library book filled with unfinished books on heartbreak, about 13 breakdowns and only 2 breakthroughs, and I've driven what feels like a million more internet Zoom miles from out of the weather of raining expectations and unpredictions to this gallery of skeletons to tell all of you, make a fucking mistake. I watched a Facebook video wherein the bass drum of an orchestra hit his note with so much passion, the drum mallet flew from his hands and hit the triangle player square in the face. But the song never missed a note. And I imagine that woman yelled, "Fuck," so loudly. It bounced off the walls of the amphitheater and into the mouths of the pearl necklace wealthy white women, and fuck, 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 fuck became the best remix the symphony has ever heard. My mother is not as out of her mind as I make her out to be, probably. But she had to have been to have created an offspring with the man I'm supposed to call father on purpose, and that makes me a mistake. But look at what this mistake can do. Look how many lives I've lived. Look how many people can love me. Look, I can learn and change and grow and evolve. Look at the moon. I've read somewhere that a former planet shoulder checked a piece of our planet, and that piece got captured into orbit. We call her the moon. And I think that she had the opportunity to roam the entire universe, but she fell so in love with our faces that she committed her body to be on night watch for eternity. Tell me you can't find the beauty in mistakes. I've lost a lot of friends, life, sanity, time, making mistakes, but I can only hope that I walk this life differently because of them. Next time, I'll be so much better, I promise. Tomorrow, I will stand in front of a woman I've never even felt worthy of looking at. She pays all her bills on time, and she wakes up early to like do Pilates or something. And she makes her mama proud, and I will say, make a mistake with me. I've lived on this broken piece of rock for 40 years, and I've literally never been right about anything. So why would I be right about you? So come with me. We'll spill our combined traumas on each other's shirts. Let's feel really uncomfortable with what we just said out loud. Let's go to the wrong airport on the wrong day and still get on the plane when it's actually time. The air is human. So let's be so human. Our flesh stinks of mess up. It'll be my fault, your bad, and our misstep, and we'll just do better next time. And I'm sorry in advance for tripping on you. I'm sorry if my drumstick hits your face, but the beat is different now. And fuck, it's beautiful. Thank you all so much for allowing me to read with you. This has been great. Thank you.
Ebo, thank you so much for your authenticity and for your permission to make mistakes. You are a miracle. I feel so grateful to follow you up because, when I host readings or when I give readings, I'm always pretty sure that I'm going to sound or look pretty stupid. So now I just don't have to worry about it, and I'm going last, so it's all good. And then I'm going to have dinner with my kid. So thank you, Ebo, and to Ricardo for just blessing us with your wonderful voices and your activism. I thought a lot about what I could share tonight, and I knew that I wanted to read from this new book, No Neutral, which came out last September. And No Neutral is a book that is very much about the idea of finding and claiming an authentic voice. And that voice in this particular book is very much one of an activist, and how that activism comes through writing and poetry. But, I think as we kind of head into the deepness and darkness of winter and are on the heels of solstice, that the thing that I've been thinking a lot about, I think this season, is more lightness and pleasure. So I thought that what I would curate tonight is a set of poems that look at a theme in my work that has been ongoing for the last 25 years or so. I write a lot about the visual arts and artists, and we'll focus the poems that I'll read tonight on that. And I have often in my career turned to visual art as a source of inspiration for, quite frankly, its beauty and the truths that visual art can reveal about the world. But I think as my work has evolved and deepened and matured, that there is now a kind of critical engagement too with the idea, with an idea of kind of what my friend Joelle Tan calls a kind of terrible beauty. So some of these poems will be, aesthetically beautiful, but then there will be some that are a little bit more provocative. So I'm going to start by reading a poem called Recognition. And Recognition is a poem that I wrote about a year ago, and is a response to an event that happened in the city of Redmond about a year ago. I was this poet laureate in the city of Redmond from 2015 to 2017. And during that time, I felt like it was really important in that role to take a position on things that were happening and be responsive to the community. And one of the things that happened during my tenure as that poet laureate is there was a pretty terrible hate crime that happened to a Black business owner who was visited by somebody who abandoned a Ku Klux Klan robe in her shop. And so when that happened, I responded with a poem, and that's always been very kind of deep in my sensibility and commitments. So last year, what happened when I was not Civic Poet is that the city commissioned a couple of artists to create a work of public art for Redmond Lights, which is kind of the civic public festival. And the work went through, I think, some review processes, was approved, and the artists who were, I believe, from Egyptian descent made the work for the civic festival and installed it, and it was on view, and they were asked to change the work by the city of Redmond, to alter it. Which kind of boils down to being told to vandalize your own work. So there was a public outcry about that, and the city and the arts office reversed its decision and said, oh, you can restore the work to, its original state. And so this is a poem about that and being in solidarity with those artists. Recognition. Last year, the city hired a diversity expert, though the public statement about the artwork came through the Office of Parks and Rec. The public artists, commissioned calligraphers, were forced to destroy their own artwork after a month and a half of labor, complying with managerial concerns to control the public narrative, creative direction from the city-state. 4 years before, the local government passed its inclusion resolution, an expression of public opinion when hate visited the community in the form of a Ku Klux Klan robe, abandoned at a Black woman's retail shop. Despite the problems with single-issue activism and virtue signaling, the artists were gracious and disciplined citizens in giving credit for the swift reversal of order. The city even provided a canopy and space heater to hasten their repair. To reinscribe in Arabic and English, remember Palestine. The very mention of homeland as hackle-raising as calling Taiwan a country, or the Duwamish, an indigenous people, a tribe, dictating what history, whose personhood is counted in the master narrative, which subjects have a right to speak. So this next poem is called Monuments to Men, Monuments for Men, sorry. I spend a lot of time in Port Townsend, in this part of that seaside town called Fort Worden, which is kind of like a compound that has like the remains of military ruins. And on this particular land in Port Townsend is a work of public art that was made by a public artist named Richard Turner. And it is a series of columns that are planted in the ground overlooking the ocean. And those columns are engraved with poems by the poet Sam Hamill. And it's an interesting piece in that when you enter the grove in which this piece of public art is situated, it is constructed in such a way that it choreographs your movement and, kind of tells you where to sit or not sit, where to turn. And that's a very interesting experience if you are thinking about your relationship to space and your own autonomy. So this is called Monuments for Men, Fort Worden. I can't deny That beauty is here, when bullied by design to turn my back to salt water and enthrone myself beneath the shelter, to face a single pale stone enshrined within a slab mausoleum, the permanence of rock as persistent as the force of men. It's evident in the words etched onto stone steles, hostile architectures crafted by those who saw themselves like gods, who coerced the eyes upward to poles planted at the site. That old trope of the man and his lover, the sea, patiently waiting for his return. I think, why not turn the gaze back to her, right now, the sea? We have already seen enough of all that's man-made. So one of the things that I enjoy writing about in the visual arts is materials. I write a lot about different art making processes, from making sculptures to making painting to just thinking about the materiality of different kinds of craft. And this piece is about the material of marble. There's like a little kind of marble shop in my neighborhood where I go running, and they import the marble from various quarries, and then they use it for interior design projects. And yeah, it's just an interesting thing to observe and to see. So this piece is called Marble Chunk Before Pygmalion. It rested in a parking lot in North Seattle. The unhewn hunk of quarried stone touched sheets of rain, stood up to wind chill while stored outdoors, absorbing the elements. For nearly a month, I passed the uncarved block each day on my morning run. It rarely strayed from its place atop a wooden pallet. Except that time, the stoneworker shoved it there, beneath the eaves of his building. Yellow nylon straps still binding it. Then one day, it was gone. Some days I slowed down to talk to it, like a potter coaxing clay, trying to find the grain, staring at its character. Black veins, silver flecks, before cut and polished to make a master vanity in West Queen Anne. Okay, so I love art. I write about it a lot. And I worked in museums for a while. And I think a job that I was always really intrigued with was like being an art handler, like the people that have to like care for and manage and maintain the works of art, which are often created and maintained during what are rather challenging circumstances. And this piece is called Poem for Outdoor Art Handlers, and is a theme that I've been kind of recycling and iterating upon for like the last 20 years or so. But this particular poem is for the art handlers at Storm King, which is an outdoor sculpture park in New York. Poem for our outdoor art handlers. Trim back every blade of grass in the shadows of the Scottish artist's 15 stones. Mend the occasional collapse in the rock wall that winds across the land. Gently mow the field of wave-like hills engineered by the architect who made a monument for the dead. Leave the fallen foliage where it lies to better hide the bronze models, aging indicators of observable change. And I'm going to read to you real quick a poem from like 21 years ago from my first book, Equivalence, which is the poem that kind of started out this theme for me. It's called Poem for Art Handlers, and there are a number of artists that appear in it. Sol LeWitt was a kind of illustrator and painter who would give museums loose instructions for how to make his wall paintings in their museums. Also mentioned is an artist named Felix Gonzalez Torres, who made portraits of people out of piles of candy, and another artist who made pollen fields out of pollen that he hand harvested from bushes coming into bloom around his house. That's Wolfgang Lieb's work, which was on view at the Henry Art Gallery a number of years ago. And Yoko Ono is in it too. Another Wolfgang Lieb piece that's mentioned is a marble stone, which preparators would have to prepare by pouring milk on the stone every day to kind of make this bubble that, by the end of the day would like stink of like sourness because, milk turns. And so they'd have to wipe it up and then start over the next day. Poem for art handlers. Start from square one, 21 isometric cubes of varying sizes with color ink washes superimposed, guidelines for a wall drawing, a written instruction, intangible scribbled notes and diagrams. Find creative storage solutions, 3,000 pounds of Belgian candies imported for a Gonzalez Tours exhibition to be stored on the delivery dock or held in low humidity alongside Canaletto. If only we hadn't sprayed the crickets raining from the ceilings, clogging the elevator shafts, one step up on the evolutionary food chain above wingless insects feeding on the pollen fields, engorged bugs leaving their tracks. Wire a phone jack in the East Gallery and wait for Yoko to call. She will telephone and tell you to imagine a happening where you clock out early after letting loose at closing, a herd of starving cats converging to lap up milk, pooling on a marble stone. Okay, so just a few more poems. I last April, went down to Southern California, which is the weird place where I grew up. And my visit happened to coincide with an incredible outdoor art exhibition in the Palm Desert, a biennial festival called Desert X, which is curated by international curators, and they fill the areas around Palm Springs and Palm Desert with extraordinary artwork. And one of the decisions that the curators made that was particularly extraordinary to me was that they decided to show the work of Tyree Nichols. So Tyree Nichols was an emerging photographer who was a young Black man who was beaten to death by the Memphis police after a routine traffic stop. And the curators contacted his family and asked if they could use some of his photographs that he had made of the place where he had lived and to install them on large billboards that were placed on either side of the road that was leaving Palm Springs. And it was a tremendously powerful thing to drive down that road, seeing these signs and these images that were meaningful to him pass by while thinking about the loss of that person's life at a roadside. At the side of the road for Tyree Nichols. Lining both sides of the highway, roadside signs, my eye caught sight of pictures the 29-year-old took down in Memphis, his adopted home, which he cared for by photographing. There was no way to slow down, go back, or park the car to process the information coming toward me in the back seat of the fast-moving car. I aimed my camera at billboards that blurred as I passed by. The removal of my eye filtered through a device, leaving me cold and distanced in the desert wind, like the wall between reading and sensing another news story and recognizing at once his name and gaze. How different to feel into his likenesses, signposts, images of bridges, water, and stone, markers shining at sunset. Another piece that I had a chance to visit at Desert X was a outdoor art installation by a Turkish artist named Rana Begum, and it's a architectural piece that is made out of yellow chain link material. Yellow chain link. My son threw himself down on hot sand despite his fear of rattlesnakes and scorpions crawling the desert floor at twilight, pulled himself through the hole in the fence, a narrow half-foot opening, to move past its material. Once on the other side and safe, he crossed through more barriers to venture closer to the center of his attention. I had described the piece to him with unremarkable language as a fence outdoors, to manage his expectations of art and tune the focus toward the presence of fences around us at border crossings. What these walls say about policies on immigration, who gets to come over and why. And later, when we are waved through a border checkpoint without being stopped, I remind myself, the child of immigrants, of what it means to have papers and be documented. I'm going to read 3 more poems. I'm going to read a poem that is about my son, Tomo, who just appeared in the last poem. Peggy and I have a long history. I read for this series about, I guess, like 10 and a half years ago. And on that night that I read, which was September 12th, I was very pregnant, and I was expecting my son Tomo to be joining me at some point. And after I read, I went into labor, my water broke, and I had my baby like within hours, basically. So Tomo is like, deeply, I think, interknit into my memories and my fondness for this series. And so to honor my son and being his mother, this is a poem called The Coming Mountain. My son Tomo complains about the sand and rocks in his shoes that accumulate as we walk through the desert at sunset to reach the art installation. Before we sit to meditate, I remind him to stretch, blow his nose, get the wiggles out before we blend with silence. My yoga teacher once told me that the asanas were performed to ready the body for sitting, everything its own journey toward wakefulness. The walk before entering the labyrinth, the path after leaving the mandala, the deep listening of a hymn with a throat and bones, feeling into the bird song that sounds out to me in the moment I sense the self merging with the sacred. And I'm just going to read one last poem, if I can find it. So this last poem is called Coiling Lines, and it is inspired by a walk that I took with a dear friend in the labyrinth outside of Mopop. And that particular labyrinth was designed by the sound artist Trimpen and another public artist. And it is kind of like a surprise. It's the kind of thing that you don't expect to encounter in Seattle, especially outside of a pop cultural museum. But it's a very magical, spiritual experience to walk through, especially with somebody that you care about. And so it's a poem that I think I've begun to read and share with audiences because I feel in many ways that the experience of walking through a labyrinth is also like the experience of reading a poem or engaging with poetry reading. Coiling lines. It would be easier to travel outside the lines or cut directly through the field, to cheat time instead of letting attention unfold at its own pace. At times, the switchbacks resemble a forking maze, the way some paths can lead to nowhere. These trails weren't drawn to be traveled side by side, but we walk them anyway, bumping into bands of tourists, gangs of families stuck fast in the web, their bodies the same as serpentine turns, put there to halt the mind that wants to think, I am doing this right, walking deeper into what was designed to reshape the perceptions, raise regard, to awaken back to heart center. Thanks so much. Thank you, Peggy, for hosting us. Any volunteers for the open mic?
We're going to be hearing from Marilyn Talley next, but first I want to thank you, one, for continuing to share Tomo with us. It's lovely to think that we get to have kind of a honorary godparents of the literary world. And I really also appreciate your curating this evening and bringing us the voices of Ricardo and Ebo, and also encouraging new members people who haven't attended before. I always want to say that now that you've discovered us, I really hope that you'll come back, and you're always welcome to contact me to, to do open mic or do a featured reading. I just really love also, Shani, the intimacy that you've managed to create for this evening with our readers. I know that everyone will agree that it's been a really magical evening. So, Mary Ellen, you are up, and then we can see if there's anyone else, or have a little chat.
Thank you. The poems were great. This was in seattlestar.net this week. If I can get it. It's just 1 second. Here. It's called New Year's Eve Women. 1. Here comes a hummingbird. See it hover over the patio near the watching woman whose heart still ticks. That bird's heart rate is if her own would be a killer. Although in such winged jewels, we call it torpor or near hibernation. The woman's heart beats on sofa cushions where her chambers sip nectar again. She knows noon sun will melt the frozen liqueur outside, sweet substitute for what was once a forest. She would love to hang from eaves and bask in sun-drenched water, still feels one ventricle's tight squeeze as she felt last night, not sleeping. 2. Farther off, across the 520 bridge, there is no patio, where darkness enfolds the last December day. Steps lead up to a church gym mezzanine where 12 women toast apple ciders, sparkling bubbles before bedding down on mats when lights go out. None of the women want to wait up until midnight. Their pancake turner clocks will flip a year of sour syrup, and their mats will wrestle daylight soon enough. For now, this night's sleep on makeshift beds is nectar. Noisy furnace makes a music to cover snoring. Ribbon-tied scarves of red and blue yarn, greetings written by school children, and coffee cards on a table will be tucked inside their rolling satchels in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen has rounded up a whole group from the new Empty Bowl Press anthology that will be joining us in March. So thank you. Now we are going to hear from Lorna D. Cervantes for open mic. Welcome, Lorna.
Oh, thank you. The earth is a child. The earth is a child who knows poems by heart, singing wind through trees and spinning on the axis of us. Across the globe, we are stretched far between and too close. Our humble arteries beat us through. The earth is a child who knows the vocabulary of ages crusted to her core, a joyful lapping. In another hemisphere, those who divide it all. Hunger's train derails, and an endless burning begins. The earth is a child just waking up. Hear it grumble, feel the cold. Thank you.
I hope you'll come and read even longer for us another time. I'm not, your name is so familiar, and I don't know if you've been featured here before, so we must get you on the roster. All right, so next month, as I said, is going to be with Weather Systems Bard, a return for the first time since February 2020. I'm so glad to see Sandra Iannone here tonight, because she closed us out 4 years ago, and we've had to draft off of that last live appearance all of 4 years ago in February 2020. So next month we are going to have Priscilla Long, Bethany Reed, Francine Walls, and Jason Thornberry back for the first time in person at the Ballard branch of the library. We're going to be experimenting with online and in person throughout the next couple of months, and seeing how that goes. But in the meantime, this event has been recorded as it was able to be on Zoom. And so it will be available on the It's About Time Writers YouTube, as well as, and I will put that link also on the Facebook group page. So what I will do, unless there's any other open mic people, is I will stop the recording, and you're all welcome to continue to, we can talk among ourselves in chat, which is always lovely after all that we've heard tonight and the variety of the work. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ebo. Thank you, Ricardo.